Orion received the assignment at the beginning of a frost cycle, when the light of his homeworld sun barely reached the lower towers of the capital. The message was brief, unceremonious, and unmistakably urgent. You are to be embedded with a human combat unit. Objective, observation and analysis. Priority, absolute. There were no explanations attached. There never were. That alone told Orion how serious the situation had become. The Al Dominion had not misunderstood war for millennia. Their doctrines were precise, their casualty projections accurate to terrifying margins. When they invaded a world, resistance collapsed exactly as predicted. Yet humans, an unremarkable species by most metrics, had shattered every model. Human units were surviving battles with a 94% retention rate in scenarios where statistical certainty demanded extinction. Entire enemy battalions were broken by forces that should not have lasted minutes. The numbers refused to obey reason, and so Orion was chosen. He was the most accomplished military observer the Al had ever produced. He had studied 12 sentient species in active war zones. His reports had rewritten invasion playbooks and altered how entire fleets were deployed. Yet despite all his experience, one fact unsettled him deeply. He had never studied humans. The transport vessel took 3 rotations to reach the edge of human-controlled space. Orion used every hour of that journey to absorb what little data existed. Humans were newcomers. Barely 4 decades since first contact. Their physiology was unimpressive. No natural armor, no enhanced sensory organs, no venom, no regenerative abilities. Their strength was average. Their reaction time unremarkable. On paper, they should have been conquered quickly, but the Dominion's records told a different story. Humans did not break. They adapted. They endured. They advanced. By the time the transport descended toward its destination, Orion's unease had grown. The base designation appeared on his display. Forward Operating Base. Persistence. He recorded the name immediately. Our military installations were named after victories, champions, or honor commanders. Humans, apparently, named theirs after ideas. Persistence. Refusal. Continuation. It was inefficient, and yet unsettling. The ramp lowered with a hiss of pressurized air, and Orion stepped into human territory for the first time. The base was smaller than expected. Compact, reinforced, deliberately unassuming. There were no grand banners or ceremonial guards. Only motion. Humans moved with steady purpose, neither rush nor idle. One waited for him near the landing zone. The human male was of average height, his skin a deep bronze tone, hair cut short in accordance with military standard. He wore field armor, but carried no visible weapon. Most unusual of all, he smiled. "You must be our observer," the human said, extending a hand in greeting. "I'm Commander Jake Monroe. Welcome to Persistence." Orion hesitated only a fraction of a second before responding in kind. Physical contact was not customary, but this was a study, not a negotiation. "I am Orion of the Al Military Science Division," he said. "I am here to document your combat methods." "Good," Monroe replied easily. "Then you'll want to meet the team. Come on, are you hungry?" Hungry? The question did not compute. Orion had expected strategy briefings, tactical simulations, threat assessments. Instead, the human commander was offering food. Before Orion could formulate a response, Monroe was already walking, speaking casually over his shoulder. "We're deploying soon, but there's time to eat." The base interior only deepened Orion's confusion. Humans worked, but without visible stress. Some maintained weapons. Others exercised. A small group sat on crates playing a card game, laughing loudly enough that Orion's auditory sensors flagged it as inappropriate for a war zone. Music echoed faintly from somewhere deeper inside the structure. There was no tension in the air. This was not how species prepared for combat. Monroe led him into a shared dining area, where 4 humans sat around a table cluttered with mismatched food containers. They looked up when Orion entered, showing neither fear nor hostility. "This is our observer," Monroe announced. "Orion." Introductions followed quickly. Sergeant Lisa Tran, compact, alert, eyes that missed nothing. Corporal Danny Ruiz, broader frame, medical insignia on his sleeve. Private Kate Holloway, young, pale-skinned, red-haired, barely past maturity. Specialist Sam Carter, large, muscular, smiling far too much. "And now," Sam said with interest, "you're the memory-perfect ones, right? Our recall accuracy exceeds." "Awesome," Sam interrupted. "You can remind me of my best jokes later." The others groaned. Oriron did not understand why. They were deploying into a hostile system within hours. The enemy had already slaughtered millions of civilians. And these humans were laughing. Food was passed freely. No one guarded portions. No hierarchy was observed at the table. Danny added extra food to Kate's plate when she wasn't looking. Lisa refilled Monroe's drink without comment. It resembled a family unit more than a military cell. "You look confused," Monroe said quietly, noticing Oriron's stillness. "I am attempting to understand your pre-combat methodology," Oriron admitted. "My species isolates before battle. We prepare for death." Monroe nodded thoughtfully. "We prepare for living," he said, "because tomorrow isn't guaranteed." Oriron stored the statement for later analysis. When the conversation shifted to the mission briefing, Oriron learned the truth. They were defending a species that had no military, a peaceful civilization caught between empires. The Galactic Council had requested volunteers. Most had declined. Humans had not. "Why?" Oriron asked. Silence followed. Then Monroe answered simply, "Because someone had to." The simplicity disturbed Oriron more than any complex explanation could have. Later, alone in his assigned quarters, Oriron reviewed the day's observations. Humans did not prepare for death. They prepared for each other. His final thought before rest formed a question he could not resolve. What kind of species chooses to die for strangers? He would soon find out. The shuttle vibrated as it cut through the upper atmosphere of the contested world. Oriron's grip tightened around the restraint bar, his claws clicking softly against the alloy. Through the narrow viewport, clouds burned orange as friction tore at the hull. Below them waited a planet already scarred by invasion. Inside the troop bay, the humans should have been silent. By every doctrine Oriron knew, this was the moment for inward focus. Final calculations, control breathing, chemical regulation of fear. Instead, Corporal Ruiz was talking. "So there we are," Danny said, grinning as the shuttle rattled violently. "Middle of nowhere, no signal, rain pouring like the universe personally hated us." Sam snorted. "You always say that part like it's new." "I'm building tension," Danny protested. "Anyway," bear comes out of trees. "A bear!" Oriron interrupted before he could stop himself. "Big one," Danny confirmed cheerfully. "Huge. Looks at my brother like he's lunch." Kate leaned forward. "This is the part where he screams, right?" "Nope. He freezes. Just stands there, pants half off." Laughter rippled through the bay. Warning lights flared red. Incoming fire. Landing in 30 seconds. The transformation was instant. The laughter died. The jokes vanished. Each human moved with sudden precision. Helmets sealed, weapons checked, armor locked. No panic. No shouting. Just readiness. Monroe's voice cut through the noise. Standard drop. Stick to formation. Oriron felt a strange tightening in his chest. Fear, perhaps, but not his own. The shuttle slammed into the ground with brutal force. Metal screamed. Gravity shifted. The rear doors blew open, revealing chaos. Fire, smoke, screams. Enemy soldiers poured through shattered structures ahead, tall, multi-limbed, armored in chitin and steel. Their weapons spat plasma in blinding arcs. There were hundreds of them. The human unit numbered 6. Oriron froze. Every instinct demanded cover, calculation, withdrawal. His species survived by knowing when not to fight. A hand seized his arm. Sergeant Tran dragged him behind a collapsed wall with shocking strength. "Stay down," she ordered. "Do not move unless I say so." Then she was gone. Oriron peered over the rubble, disbelief flooding his senses. The humans advanced. They did not charge recklessly. They flowed, splitting, converging, covering one another without verbal command. Monroe signaled with 2 fingers. Sam stepped forward, his heavy weapon roaring like thunder. Enemy ranks collapsed under the sudden assault. Lisa provided precise cover fire, forcing enemy units into predictable movement lanes. Danny repositioned, dragging wounded humans to safety while firing one-handed. Kate moved along the flank, silent, deadly, impossibly fast. They spoke in fragments. Left, moving, covered, reloading. It was not chaos. It was choreography. An enemy soldier broke through the line, sprinting toward Oriron's position. Its blades gleamed red with blood. Oriron's limbs refused to respond. This was death. Clean, certain, then a blur across his vision. Kate slammed into the creature, driving her blade into a joint in its armor. The enemy collapsed, twitching. Kate was already gone, chasing the next threat without looking back. The battle raged for nearly an hour. When it ended, the enemy had withdrawn, leaving their dead scattered across broken ground. The humans still stood, not untouched but alive. Danny sat against the wall, blood soaking his leg. He tightened the bandage with clenched teeth, then laughed softly. Guess today wasn't leg day. You are severely injured, Oriron said, stunned. I've had worse. Danny winced, still breathing. Movement drew Oriron's attention. From the rubble emerged a small figure, one of the native species. A child, barely more than 4 cycles old, shaking, eyes wide with terror. Danny saw the child too. Despite his wound, he pushed himself upright and limped forward, lowering himself slowly. Hey, he said gently. You're okay. The child didn't understand the words, but understood the tone. It ran to him, clinging desperately. Danny lifted the child carefully. Pain etched across his face and carried him back to the group. Monroe ordered a sweep. 12 civilians were found alive. The humans shared their water, their rations, their medical supplies, without hesitation. Night fell quickly. Oriron expected them to stop, to fortify, to wait for daylight. Instead, Monroe shook his head. There's a refugee camp north of here, 30 kilometers. These people won't survive if we stay put. You intend to move through hostile territory, Oriron said, at night with wounded and civilians. Yes, it was madness. Every tactical framework, Oriron knew, rejected this outright. Yet they moved, slowly, carefully, relentlessly. Oriron walked beside Kate, her young face unreadable in the darkness. May I ask you something? He said quietly. Sure. Do humans ever surrender when the odds become impossible? Kate stopped, looking genuinely confused. Why would we? To survive. To fight later. She considered this, then shook her head. My grandmother told me something. She said surrender means hoping your enemy is kind, and hope isn't planned. She resumed walking. Besides, nothing's over until it's over. Oriron recorded the statement internally. Humans did not calculate surrender thresholds. They simply refused to accept them. By the time they reached the refugee camp before dawn, Oriron felt something unfamiliar. Exhaustion, yes, but also trust. Against all logic. Walking beside these strange creatures who laughed before battle and bled for strangers, Oriron felt safer than he ever had in war. And that realization frightened him more than the enemy ever could. 3 cycles had passed since their landing, though time had begun to blur for Oriron. Sleep came in fragments, short, shallow intervals stolen between movement and gunfire. His scales dulled, his muscles ached, and yet the humans continued, as if driven by an internal engine he could neither locate nor measure. They had delivered the civilians safely to the refugee camp. That alone should have marked mission success. Instead, Monroe accepted new orders without hesitation. A command node, he said, studying the terrain display projected from his wrist device. 20 kilometers east. If we take it out, the pressure on the camp eases. No one argued. Oriron watched as they rotated watch duties with seamless efficiency. 2 slept while 4 guarded. Then they switched. No complaints. No visible resentment. Just trust. Trust that the others would hold the line. Trust that rest would come when it could. His report had grown massive, filled with observations he could not yet categorize. Humans were not physically superior. They were not tactically perfect, but they possessed a quality that pushed them beyond rational limits. They did not stop when logic said stop. On the third night, during a skirmish along a ruined transit corridor, Sam tackled an enemy soldier that had become separated from its unit. The creature hissed and snapped, its limbs flailing violently. Orion expected immediate execution. Instead, Danny knelt beside it. "It's bleeding out," Danny said calmly, opening his medical kit. "What are you doing?" Orion demanded. "Treating it. It is an enemy combatant. Its death improves your odds." Danny didn't look up. "It's hurt. I can help. So I will." The enemy soldier froze as Danny worked, its compound eyes wide, not with pain but with terror. Not fear of death, fear of confusion. It had been trained to expect cruelty or efficiency. Mercy did not exist in its worldview. When Danny finished, he stood and stepped back. "It'll live." "It may attack you later," Orion said. "Probably," Danny replied with a shrug. "Future problem." The prisoner was restrained and later released far from camp. Orion recorded the event carefully. Human doctrine includes medical treatment of enemy combatants. Tactical value unclear. Psychological impact severe. That night, Orion stood watch with Sam beneath a sky thick with unfamiliar stars. "You're thinking too loud," Sam said, cleaning his massive weapon. "I am attempting to understand your behavior," Orion replied. "Your humor, your mercy, they are inefficient." Sam chuckled softly. "Yeah, that's what they tell us." "Then why persist?" Sam leaned back, gazing upward. "Fear's always there. You can't erase it. So we make jokes. We laugh at death, so it doesn't get the last word." "This seems irrational." "Oh, absolutely," Sam said. "Humans are a mess, but we're a mess that keeps moving." The next morning, they reached a ridge overlooking the command node. The enemy fortification was dense, fortified, alive with movement. Lisa studied it silently. 15-1, maybe worse. "I've seen uglier," Monroe replied. "When?" "Tuesday." Even Lisa smiled. The attack began at dawn. Sam drew fire, his weapon shaking the ground. Enemy units surged forward exactly as predicted. Lisa and Danny flanked left. Kate claimed the high ground. Monroe drove straight through the center. Orion observed from above, recording every movement. The humans used to rain ruthlessly. Smoke, debris, elevation, timing. They bent the battlefield around themselves. Monroe's voice remained calm over comms. "Hold the line." Those words echoed through Orion's thoughts. Hold, not advance, not retreat. Endure. The fight lasted 40 minutes. When it ended, the command node burned. The enemy retreated. Victory. But Kate was missing. They found her at the bottom of a ravine, legs shattered. She had dragged herself 200 meters to pull a wounded comrade into cover before losing consciousness. As Danny treated her, Kate stirred. Her first words were not about pain. "Did he make it?" "Yes," Danny said gently. "You saved him." She smiled, then passed out again. Orion stood apart, his mind overwhelmed. These humans sacrificed themselves without calculation, without expectation of reward, without certainty of success. It was illogical and terrifying, because an enemy who ignores survival probability cannot be predicted. The refugee camp came into view by nightfall. Thousands of civilians. No defenses. No weapons. Their leader, an elder with fur gone white, spoke softly. "They are coming. 10,000 at least. Command, order extraction. Civilian evacuation, impossible." Monroe refused. "We're staying." The words reverberated through Orion like a shockwave. Disobeying direct command was unthinkable. Yet no one left. They built defenses with wreckage and desperation. Dug trenches. Positioned weapons. Oraron found himself helping, not because it made sense, because leaving felt wrong. As night fell, Monroe gathered them. "We protect the center," he said. "That's where the children are." The enemy came at midnight, a living tide. Sam's weapon roared. The lines bent, nearly broke. Then the sky ignited. Ships dropped from orbit, reinforcements. Other species had heard Monroe's refusal. They had come. The battle lasted until dawn. When the sun rose, the camp still stood. The children lived. Oraron watched Monroe sit against a broken wall, exhausted. A small child approached and hugged him. The commander wept. And Oraron finally understood. The terror of humans was not their strength. It was how deeply they cared. Dawn revealed what the night had tried to hide. The refugee camp was scarred. Burned shelters, shattered ground. The smell of smoke and blood lingering in the air. But it still stood. More importantly, the people were alive. Children clung to parents. Elders sat wrapped in donated blankets. The sound of quiet, sobbing mixed with exhausted laughter. They had survived. Oraron walked through the aftermath slowly, his mind struggling to reconcile what he saw with everything he knew about warfare. Humans and allied soldiers from 3 different species treated the wounded together without asking questions, without checking insignias. Enemy prisoners received water. Civilians received food before soldiers did. This was not how wars were won. And yet it had worked. Commander Monroe sat against the remains of transport hull, helmet removed, face streaked with soot and dry blood. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing. He looked older than he had the day before. A small child approached him. She hesitated, then stepped closer, her tiny hand shaking. Without a word, she wrapped her arms around Monroe's neck. The commander stiffened, then melted. He held the child carefully, as if afraid she might break, silent tears cutting clean lines through the grime on his face. Oraron recorded nothing in that moment. There were no words in any tactical language to describe what he was witnessing. 3 cycles later, extraction shuttles arrived. The sound of their engines echoed across the valley like thunder, stirring renewed emotion throughout the camp. Civilians lined up in careful rows, each clutching whatever remained of their former lives. Every single one of them would leave alive. Monroe stood near the landing zone, speaking with a senior human officer. The conversation was sharp, clipped, and visibly unpleasant. Oraron's translator picked up fragments. Direct violation, reckless disregard. Court review likely. When the officer departed, Monroe simply nodded and turned back to the evacuation, lifting an elderly civilian into a shuttle as gently as if she were made of glass. Lisa Tran approached Oraron, her arm in a sling, a fresh bandage across her forehead. "He's in trouble," she said quietly. "He saved thousands," Oraron replied. "Yes," Lisa said, "and he disobeyed orders to do it." She smiled faintly. "Humans are funny like that. We punish people first. Then if history agrees with them, we give them medals." "And he accepts this?" Lisa watched Monroe for a moment. "Jake doesn't care about medals or punishment. He cares about outcomes." Oraron observed Monroe again, how he spoke softly to civilians, how he cared supplies despite his injuries, how exhaustion never stopped his movement. His people defined leadership as command authority. Humans defined it as responsibility. That distinction mattered more than Oraron had ever imagined. The camp emptied slowly. When the final shuttle lifted off, cheers rippled through the remaining soldiers and volunteers. It was not triumph, it was relief. Kate, still unable to walk, coordinated logistics from a portable station until the last moment. Danny assisted medical teams until he physically collapsed from fatigue. Sam stood watch until there was nothing left to guard. Only then did the humans stop. Later that evening, Oraron found them gathered in the same way they always were, around shared food, sitting close, laughing softly despite everything. They were bruised, broken, exhausted, and still laughing. Danny told a story about nearly bleeding out while arguing over ration flavors. Sam exaggerated the size of the enemy force until even Oraron realized it was absurd. Kate rolled her eyes but laughed anyway. Monroe noticed Oraron standing apart. "You're welcome to join," he said. "Food's better when it's shared." Oraron hesitated, then sat. A plate was pushed toward him without comment. A drink followed. No one asked questions. No one analyzed him. For the first time since the assignment began, Oraron did not feel like an observer. He felt included. That night, alone in his quarters, Oraron began drafting the final sections of his report. He had been tasked with identifying human combat advantages. He found himself writing something else. Humans did not fight for conquest. They fought for people. They rejected the idea that survival alone defined victory. They believed some things were worse than death. This belief made them dangerous and unstoppable. As the transport prepared for departure, Oraron looked down at the camp one last time. Somewhere below, humans were preparing to deploy again, to face impossible odds again, to choose strangers again. He realized something then that unsettled him deeply. If humans ever decided something was worth protecting, no force in the galaxy could take it from them. The transport lifted from the planet in a controlled ascent, its engines humming with steady restraint. Oraron watched the ruined valley recede beneath the clouds, the refugee camp shrinking until it was no more than a scar in the landscape. Every life down there still breathed. That fact alone broke every probability model he had ever trusted. Inside the vessel, silence dominated. Not the tense silence of fear, but the heavy quiet of exhaustion finally given permission to exist. Humans sat strapped into their seats, some sleeping upright, others staring into nothing with unfocused eyes. Commander Monroe moved to the cabin slowly, checking restraints, murmuring quiet reassurances. His uniform was patched, his movement stiff with pain, yet he did not sit until everyone else had. Leadership, Oraron realized, was not a rank. It was a habit. The journey to the nearest command station took 2 days. Oraron spent most of that time alone, compiling data, replaying memories, and struggling to shape his findings into something that would not be dismissed as emotional contamination. The Al-High Command wanted answers, numbers, weaknesses, predictive models. What Oraron had was something else entirely. He began his report the way doctrine demanded, structured, objective, precise. Subject, human combat behavior. Observation period, 14 cycles. Engagements witnessed, 9. Casualty ratio, statistically anomalous. But each time he tried to reduce the humans to metrics, something essential slipped away. How did one quantify refusing extraction to save strangers? How did one graph a commander crying over a child? He rewrote entire sections repeatedly, deleting sterile phrasing, replacing it with uncomfortable truth. When the transport docked, Monroe was summoned immediately. 2 armed officers escorted him away. He did not resist. He did not protest. As he passed Oraron, Monroe paused briefly. "You okay?" "Yes," Oraron replied truthfully. "Are you?" Monroe smiled faintly. "I'll be fine." There was no fear in his voice, only acceptance. Later, Lisa confirmed what Oraron had suspected. "He's facing formal charges," she said. "Disobeying a direct extraction order. Endangering military assets." "And the lives saved?" Oraron asked. "They'll count later," Lisa said, "once the paperwork catches up with reality." Oraron returned to his quarters and continued writing. The more he wrote, the more certain he became that his report would not be welcomed. It was not a tactical document. It was a warning. Humans were not invincible. They bled. They tired. They died. But they did not retreat from moral commitment. That made them unpredictable. That made them terrifying. Humans do not calculate acceptable losses the same way other species do. They calculate acceptable inaction. This single sentence unsettled Oraron more than any casualty statistic ever had. Days later, Monroe returned. He looked the same as always, tired, calm, unbroken. "Got a slap on the wrist," he said lightly, "and a mountain of forms." "You were not imprisoned," Oraron said. "No," Monroe replied. "Not this time." They walked together briefly along the station corridor. "I assume your report won't make me look good," Monroe said with a half-smile. Oraron considered lying. Instead, he said, it will make your species dangerous. Monroe laughed quietly. We already are. Orion finalized his report that night. He removed all emotional language. And still, it read like a declaration of awe. He concluded with a recommendation, something no observer had ever done before. Strategic advisory. Humans should never be treated as expendable allies, nor should they ever be made enemies. Their capacity for compassion directly amplifies their lethality when provoked. When he sealed the transmission, Orion felt something close to fear. Not for himself, but for any civilization arrogant enough to ignore what he had written. Before departure, Orion visited the human unit one last time. They were preparing again. Weapons cleaned, armor repaired, food shared. Sam waved him over. You're missing out. We got real coffee this time. I am grateful, Orion said, sitting. Kate raised her cup. To not dying. Again, Danny added. They laughed. Monroe caught Orion's gaze. So, he said, did you get what you came for? Orion looked around the table, at soldiers who had faced extinction and chosen mercy, at laughter born from defiance, not ignorance. Yes, he said slowly, and far more. Later, alone aboard his transport, Orion composed a private addendum, one not requested, not authorized. A personal note. I was sent to study humans as soldiers. I leave having learned what makes them human. They fight not because they love war, but because they love life too fiercely to abandon it. As the ship jumped to faster than light, Orion felt something unfamiliar settle within him. Hope and a quiet certainty. The galaxy was not prepared for humans. Orion's return to Al territory was met with formality, silence, and unease. His transport docked at the High Observation Spire, a place reserved for data that could shift doctrine or shatter it. Officials greeted him without ceremony, their expressions carefully neutral. He was escorted directly to debriefing without rest. The council chamber was vast and cold, its walls etched with victories dating back thousands of cycles. Orion stood alone at the center, his completed report already projected before the assembled minds of the Dominion. They had read it. That much was obvious. You were tasked with identifying exploitable human weaknesses, one counselor stated. You have not done so. I have, Orion replied calmly. They are simply not physical. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Explain. Orion inhaled slowly. Humans are limited by exhaustion. They suffer psychologically from prolonged loss. They bond deeply, and that bond can be used against them. The council leaned forward, but Orion continued. Exploiting those weaknesses guarantees escalation beyond prediction. Silence fell again. You describe compassion as a strategic force, another counselor said. This is not a measurable variable. Neither is refusal. Orion answered. Yet humans weaponize it. He replayed recorded footage. Monroe refusing extraction. Danny treating an enemy. Kate crawling on shattered bone to save another soldier. They do not abandon what they protect. Orion said, once humans decide something matters, no cost becomes unacceptable. That is madness. A voice hissed. Yes, Orion agreed. And it works. The council dismissed him without comment. No praise, no rebuke, which unsettled him more than either. Days passed, then weeks. Fragments of his report began circulating through restricted channels. Tactical planners requested clarifications. Political analysts demanded revisions. Some laughed at his conclusions. Others grew quiet. Reports arrived of similar human behavior across multiple fronts. Units refusing retreat, defending civilians beyond mandate, inspiring allied species to fight when logic said flee. The pattern was spreading. Orion followed these developments with growing tension. He recognized the danger. Humanity was becoming something more than a military presence. It was becoming a moral gravity well. Meanwhile, Commander Monroe's unit redeployed. Again and again, losses mounted. Victories followed. Civilians survived. The pattern repeated. Orion found himself thinking of the humans often, not as data points, but as individuals. Sam's laughter, Danny's stubborn kindness, Kate's quiet certainty, Lisa's calm precision, Monroe's steady refusal to accept the easy way out. They had changed him. He realized this when he was reassigned to another observation project and felt something dangerously close to disappointment. Before departure, Orion accessed human public archives, something he had never done before. He studied their art, their history, their stories. Again and again he found the same theme. Humans celebrated sacrifice. They told stories where heroes lost everything and called it victory. That realization chilled him. A species that admired sacrifice would never be intimidated by threat alone. Weeks later, Orion received an encrypted message from Monroe. Still alive, still causing trouble. Hope your people didn't throw you out an airlock. Orion responded before protocol could stop him. They considered it. Monroe's reply came quickly. Figures. If you ever want to observe again, you know where to find us. Orion stared at the message long after it faded. He understood what the invitation truly meant. Not observation. Belonging. At the same time, darker intelligence arrived. A coalition of hostile powers had identified humans as a destabilizing factor. Plans were forming, not for open war but containment, isolation, pressure. Break them quietly. Orion submitted an urgent advisory. Humans respond to pressure by resisting. Humans respond to threat by escalating. If you attempt to break them, you will instead unify them. The response from the council was delayed. Too delayed. Orion felt something tighten within him. For the first time in his life, he feared his own people's decisions, because he had seen what humans did when cornered. They did not surrender. They burned brighter. The first sign came quietly. A trade route rerouted. A diplomatic summit postponed. A request for human assistance declined without explanation. To most governments, these were minor fluctuations. To Orion, they were warning tremors. Containment had begun. Human space did not erupt in protest. There were no threats broadcast across the galactic network, no grand declarations of defiance. Humans simply adjusted. Supply chains shifted. Civilian convoys were escorted instead of abandoned. Military units doubled patrols along borders that had never before required them. They adapted. That, Orion realized, was the most dangerous thing they could do. The second sign was more obvious. A human relief convoy was attacked in neutral territory. Officially, it was blamed on pirates. Unofficially, everyone knew better. The response from human command was measured, restrained, and terrifying in its precision. The pirates vanished. Not dramatically, not publicly. They were simply never heard from again. Orion's inbox filled with fragmented reports. Human units were responding faster than expected, not with overwhelming force, but with surgical certainty. They did not attack populations. They did not occupy territory. They removed threats. And then they stopped. Other species began to notice. They're not conquering. One analyst remarked during a closed briefing. They're correcting. That word unsettled the chamber. Correction implied judgment. The pressure campaign escalated. Human diplomatic envoys were denied landing rights. Resource tariffs spiked. Human colonies found themselves suddenly isolated. And still no retaliation. Instead, humans helped each other. Civilian volunteers crossed space to reinforce distant settlements. Retired soldiers returned to service without being asked. Artists, engineers, medics, all moved toward the edges. Orion watched this mobilization with growing dread. It was not fear that drove them. It was loyalty. Then came the incident that changed everything. A refugee convoy, non-human, unarmed, was destroyed after seeking asylum in human-controlled space. Survivors transmitted a final message before the signal died. They said helping us would be inconvenient. The transmission went viral. Human response was immediate and unified. For the first time since joining the galactic community, humans spoke with one voice. Not a declaration of war, a declaration of intent. They would protect refugees. They would defend civilians. They would not accept convenience as an excuse for cruelty. Any force that attempted to prevent this would be treated as hostile. Orion read the statement 3 times. There was no rage in it, only certainty. Within days, volunteer fleets formed, not just human. Species that had once refused council calls now rallied beside them. The same pattern Orion had witnessed on that first battlefield, repeated on a galactic scale. Humans did not command allies. They inspired them. Monroe's unit was redeployed to the frontier. Again, Orion intercepted fragments of their transmissions. Sam joking about outdated rations. Danny arguing with medics over returning to duty too early. Kate, promoted despite protests, coordinating fire support with terrifying calm. Lisa, unchanged, steady as gravity. And Monroe, still refusing the easy choice. Orion sent a private message. You were right. It's spreading. The reply came hours later. Good. Means we're not alone. That frightened Orion more than anything else. A united galaxy was dangerous. A united galaxy inspired by humans? Unstoppable. The Council finally responded to Orion's advisories. They requested an emergency session. This time, the chamber was not dismissive. You warned us, the High Councilor admitted. We did not listen. Orion did not gloat. There was no satisfaction in being right. They are not seeking dominance, he said. They are seeking alignment. Those who share their values stand with them. Those who don't won't be attacked. What will they do then? Orion's voice was quiet. They will endure and make everyone else uncomfortable until they change. Silence filled the chamber. A civilization that refused to bend, that refused to hate, but also refused to stop. The Council finally asked the question Orion had been waiting for. What is your recommendation? Orion answered without hesitation. Stand beside them, publicly, completely. And if we don't, Orion thought of a commander crying over a child, of soldiers laughing before impossible battles, of a species that cared too much to quit. Then pray, he said, that they never decide you're a problem. The warning came too late. Orion knew at the moment the Council's reply finally arrived, measured, cautious, and fatally polite. Your concerns have been noted. Strategic containment remains under review. No immediate action required. No immediate action. That phrase echoed in Orion's mind like a death sentence. Containment had already begun. Human supply routes were delayed by neutral authorities. Joint operations were quietly reassigned. Allied species received subtle advisories suggesting that human units were unpredictable, emotionally compromised, strategically unreliable. It was bloodless, clean, and incredibly stupid. Orion watched the report stack up. Human units adapted instantly. They shared supplies. They rerouted logistics without complaint. They began relying on each other instead of central command. Civilians noticed too. Refugee worlds opened their ports willingly. Independent fleets volunteered escort. Containment did not isolate humans. It revealed them. Wherever humans went, stories followed. Stories of soldiers who stayed when everyone else left, of medics who treated enemies, of commanders who disobeyed orders to save children. Stories spread faster than fleets ever could. Orion received another message from Monroe, this one shorter. Things are getting tense out here. Orion responded immediately. They are trying to pressure you into shrinking. Monroe's reply came after several hours. Yeah, not really our thing. Soon after, the first real test arrived. A neutral system, densely populated, strategically valuable, was attacked by a Dominion-backed proxy force. Human units were present in advisory roles only. They had no mandate to engage. The request for help came anyway. Human command hesitated, then refused to stand down. Orion watched the feeds with a knot in his chest as Monroe's unit deployed, outnumbered, undersupplied, unsupported. Again, the battle was brutal. Human losses were real this time. 2 units were wiped out holding evacuation corridors. Monroe's unit barely survived, battered and bleeding, but the civilians escaped. And the galaxy noticed. Public channels erupted. Independent worlds demanded explanations. Allied species openly questioned Dominion strategy. Containment shattered. The council convened an emergency session. Oraron stood before them once more. "You try to pressure a species that defines itself by resistance," he said quietly. "You treated compassion as weakness. And what would you have us do?" a counselor demanded. Oraron did not hesitate. "Treat them as equals," he said, "or prepare to face them united." Silence. Then something unprecedented happened. The council asked him to stay, not as an observer, as an advisor. Meanwhile, Monroe's unit regrouped. They buried their dead. They mourned briefly. Then they prepared again. Kate, now walking with a brace, addressed new recruits, humans and non-humans alike. "We don't promise survival," she told them. "We promise we won't walk away." Sam cracked a joke. Danny checked medical kits. Lisa mapped terrain. Monroe listened, always listening. Oraron watched from afar, understanding now that this was not a military force. It was a philosophy in armor, and philosophies, once armed, change the universe. He sent one final message to Monroe. "The galaxy is adjusting to you." The reply came back simple and unmistakably human. Good. It needed to. Oraron looked out at the stars, older and wiser than when this journey began. He understood now why humans frightened empires. They did not seek to rule the galaxy. They sought to protect it. And anyone standing in the way of that purpose would be taught the difference between mercy and surrender,